All right, so anyway, so that's, we see the underworld, we see that which lies beyond the light, and in there we see a fragment of that that's basically hellish, and all of that's incorporated into the story, and everyone understands that when they see it, even without, I would say, the overt references to Nazism. Okay, so now Scar has a plan. He's going to kill the king, and he's going to do that by putting what the king loves in danger. And so Scar, feigning sympathy, has enticed Simba down into this ravine, and Scar's minions are going to cause a wildebeest stampede, right? So a mindless stampede to put Simba in danger. And so that's what happens here. The wildebeest start to march into the ravine, and everyone is making a Scar tells Mufasa that Simba is down in that ravine, and entices him down there, and so they're all off running to see if they can save Simba. And then you see Mufasa running in front of the wildebeest herd, trying to find his son and trying to stay ahead of them, the mad mob that's put his son in danger. And so he tries to escape, climbing up the butte, which is almost a sheer cliff, and when he gets to the top, his brother is waiting for him there, and he asks him to pull him up, and Scar basically, before he kills him, indicates that he's betraying him and puts his claws into Mufasa's paws and throws him off the cliff. And so that's that, and it's a sad part of the story. It's a hard part that's very hard on kids because the father has died, and you know, it's a rare kid who won't cry about that scene in particular, where you see Simba very upset and his father dying. Now, this is a hard part of the story to interpret, and I don't know if it's because of my lack of ability to interpret or because the story takes a weird twist here, but there is this confusion in the story about whether Simba's an innocent victim who's set up for the murder of his father, or whether he actually bears some guilt for it, you know, and he's broken some rules and so on, so he's not exactly placed in the position of innocence, but of course he's also been set up by Scar. In any case, Scar tells him that it's his fault, pure and pure, and that because of that he's going to have to leave. He's going to have to be banished beyond the kingdom. Now, you see this motif quite frequently in hero stories, where the hero has to be raised outside of the kingdom. That happens with King Arthur, for example. And it happens with Harry Potter, right? Because Harry Potter is raised by muggles instead of being inside the magic kingdom. So it's a very common theme, and partly what it means is that it means two things. One is that you do grow up alienated from your culture to some degree. There's no way around that, because the culture doesn't match you perfectly, and it doesn't work for you perfectly, and it's old and it's kind of corrupt, and it alienates you as it's shaping you, and so you're going to develop some separation from it. And you see that in intergenerational rhetoric, you know, where the new generation has the proclivity to blame the previous generation for everything that's wrong with the current system. And fair enough, you know, because you do inherit everything that's wrong. Of course, you also inherit everything that's going well, which is a good thing to also notice. But the idea is that you can't help but be alienated from, let's call it the patriarchy for lack of a better word, because it's got a tyrannical element and because it's not matched well to you. So, but then there's also this other issue, which is, well, maybe you're not being successful by the terms that are, by the values that are instantiated in the current system. And you might say, well, that's because the system is set up in an unfair manner, and fair enough. But it's also possibly because you're just not very good at acting out those values, right? So part of the reason you get alienated from your culture is because the culture is corrupt. But another part of the reason is you're just not doing as well as you could be. You're not playing by even your own rules properly. And so you get alienated and you're unsuccessful because of your own inadequacies. And so the movie plays both of those. It's obviously Simba is set up, but there is an intimation that he's not entirely blameless as well. Anyways, he's very broken up about this, and no wonder. It's also partly a story of the emergence of adolescence, because, you know, when you're a child and you're ensconced right inside the familial framework, then you sort of exist within that system of rules, like you would under the Piagetian scheme. But when you become an adolescent, then there's much more of a proclivity to break free and to start breaking rules. And so that's also akin in some sense to the death of the father. And that's a necessary developmental stage. Anyway, Scar comes down into the ravine. It's all foggy now because that goes along with the sort of murkiness of death, and tells Simba that it's his fault and that he's going to have to leave. He's going to have to leave the kingdom of his father, which makes sense now. His father's dead, so how are you going to, once your father has died, how are you going to stay around in his kingdom, so to speak? So, and then Scar tries to get these hyenas to go track Simba down and kill him. So, and Zazu goes back to tell all the rest of the lions that Mufasa is dead and that Simba has disappeared. And then Scar takes over Pride Rock. And so what's happened now is the malevolent element of the king has obtained control over the state, right? And so this is the king, the wise king wasn't paying enough attention. That's one way of looking at it. And so the malevolent part of the state has now got control. This is a very, very old idea. I've traced it back at least several thousand years in its representation in stories. You can see it in Egyptian mythology, for example. So the idea is that as the social structure builds in complexity, it offers you the protection of a functioning complex system, but it also becomes increasingly likely to turn into a tyranny. And because it's more and more powerful, the fact of its potential for tyranny becomes more and more of a danger. And so then the question is, well, what are the factors that encourages it turning into a tyranny? And one factor would be the wise part of it is not paying enough attention to the malevolent part of it. And you could say that's true at the state level, and it's also true at the individual level, right? You have to watch your own proclivity to upset yourself and other people, and take that into account and pay careful attention to it, because otherwise it can gain control, especially because you're going to avoid looking at it. And one of the characteristics of the wise king who gets overthrown by the tyrant is that he has an evil brother and he won't pay enough attention to him. He avoids, he doesn't look. And so the evil king gets the upper hand, and that's what's happened here. And so notice now he takes possession of Pride Rock, not in full daylight, right? But at night. So that ties his rule into the rule of unconscious processes and malevolence.